So my name is Ashlee Hollinger. I'm a counseling therapist with Breelove Counselling, who has partnered with CMHA New Brunswick to offer some different programming through this pandemic and doing virtual groups and webinars and different things like that. So that is who I am, and I'm really excited to be here with you guys and offer any sort of tips and tricks that I have in my wheelhouse that might be helpful during this time. So I guess I'm going to invite as many questions as I can, and just, I guess maybe we can start with the idea of how we're feeling and how this pandemic is affecting us, and being isolated and having to social distance and all of that craziness. So our first question is asking about cabin fever. So we've been in kind of more social distancing and isolation for about a week now, and someone asked what the best advice to combat that is. I think something that is helpful during this time is, one, to remember that this is temporary, as much as we don't know how long this is going to be. It is a temporary situation, so this isn't going to last forever. And I think finding new ways to entertain ourselves, right? We're being asked to completely change our routines, completely change our lifestyles, the way we normally go about doing our day-to-day lives. So this is a huge shift for everyone. So one, have compassion for yourself in the sense that you're in a huge transition period. I mean, all of us are feeling the effects of having to change our lives and our routines, but also be kind to yourself in that and throughout that. And find creative ways to entertain yourself. This is a good time to do things that maybe you haven't had the chance to, like working out at home, which has been I know for myself, it's been an interesting experience trying to, get the motivation to do that, but kind of, exercise as much as you can. If you can, get yourself outdoors and get some fresh air as much as you can as well. That's really helpful. It can be hard staring at the same four walls all day. So fresh air is really, really helpful for your mental state. Try new hobbies, right? We have so much time on our hands now, and maybe this isn't new for all of us, but for some of us, we have more time than we're used to. So it's a good way to allow ourselves the ability to try something new. And oftentimes we're so go, and we have such a schedule and a routine that we don't have the opportunity to really sit and be like, what are things that bring me joy? What are things that I want to do for myself? So now that we have the opportunity to, it's okay to carve out some time to do those things for yourself. It's okay to allow yourself the space to say, I want to do something fun rather than constantly being productive. I think one thing that this quarantine and COVID has done is allowed us to slow down a little bit and really, really check in with ourselves on what really matters in life. And a lot of that comes down to ourselves and making ourselves happy, and how to do that without the regular things that we would normally do, like going out to eat and going and entertaining ourselves through external means outside of the home. So I think there's lots of ways to do that, but it's about kind of pushing ourselves to do it, because it can be tricky. And I think sometimes when we don't have that routine, we can become unmotivated or demotivated a little bit. And so it's interesting now that we have to kind of force ourselves to get out in the morning and kind of do that same thing. Oftentimes people find helping themselves through making a routine, right? So even if it's as simple as scheduling in what time you're going to eat breakfast, what time you're going to try maybe exercising, what time you're going to eat lunch. So still maintaining some sort of structure in your day, even though you have a lot of time and you're doing it all from home. So another question came in specifically about the news and how the news is making a sense of anxiety, and more so than usual. And I think that's a great point. I myself have felt that as well. It's almost like right now we're in a state of global anxiety, if that makes sense. So we're constantly bombarded with information, and things are changing day to day, and we're just struggling with that constant bombardment of information, and it's scary information. It's not easy to take in the fact that this is happening around the world, and there's a lot of fear associated with it. And I also think that in some ways, as much as the news is providing us with information, and it's important information, they also don't deliver it in a way that's sensitive to mental health. So in a sense, we're hearing all this stuff, and we're being told all this information, but they're not being mindful that maybe everyone doesn't understand certain topics, and so they're not portraying it in a way that is easily digestible, I guess. So some things we can do to mitigate that is I mean, really be mindful about how much you're watching the news. Maybe choose one outlet to watch, and limit the amount of time you watch. Don't have it on all day. Make sure that when you are watching the news and you can feel your anxiety rising, just be mindful and tune into yourself on that, and say, okay, is this helping me or is this hurting me, right? When we watch the news, we think, okay, well, I want to be informed, I want to stay up to date, but can you get that information in a different way? Can you read an article online that will summarize all this information? Do you have to have the news on, and do you have to hear the news and watch the news on a day-to-day basis for, I mean, however long you're going to watch it, right? So just, again, about that mindfulness and being intentional about how you watch the news and how you interact with news media, and news outlets, and just checking in on how how it makes you feel. Because I think it's great that you have that self-awareness, that you're able to notice that you have anxiety related to watching the news. I think that's the first step, because I think maybe a lot of people aren't aware that this watching the news all the time and hearing the constant updates is making them anxious, and then that comes out in different ways in their day, and it might affect them in different ways that they're not necessarily aware of. So I think if you can pinpoint, okay, well, when I watch the news, my anxiety rises, well, then you have a way to work on that, right? You know what the trigger is, so you can work on limiting that or being more mindful of it, etc. So it's really about being intentional about how you interact with the news, rather than not watching it at all, and understanding that watching it all day isn't going to really change your understanding, right? They kind of say the same things over and over again, unless there's some huge shift or change. So you can get the news in smaller doses, and in different ways that were easier to digest for you, and kind of limit your anxiety levels. So the next question comes in the sense of fearing, especially during stressful times. I think our mental health, any sort of underlying mental health conditions, can really be triggered by stressful times, especially with this one. Like I said earlier, our whole lives are changing, our whole routine is changing. So the ways that maybe you were coping before with your mental health are taken away from you. Say you go to the gym every day to combat anxiety, or say you go for a walk every day, or with a friend, or you have a set weekly meeting with a friend, you go out to dinner as a way, like just different things that we do to socialize and to combat our feelings of mental health or symptoms of mental health, right now are kind of being taken away from us. And that can lead to definitely increased senses of anxiety or depression. Even being in isolation, we know that being isolated and being socially isolated can have a lot of negative effects on our mental health and our minds. So I think there's a lot of negative thoughts that come up in times of stress. A lot of your mind just kind of runs away on you, and you can get stuck in this negative thinking and this sense of hopelessness or sense of overwhelm. When we are self-critical, or when we're having those thoughts of what if I lose my job? What if I never get back on my feet? What if this pandemic takes over and we're isolated forever? What if I get sick? What if my family gets sick and it's really bad? Like, we have all these kind of negative thoughts associated to times like this, where there's a global crisis. So something to be mindful of, one, is to catch yourself when you're thinking that way. And even having the awareness of those thoughts is really important, because if you can be aware of it, then you can start to pick away at it and be like, okay, I know I'm thinking this way. And not that they're irrational thoughts, right? I mean, it's very valid to be worried and to be scared right now. But at the same time, we know that it's if we worry about it, we're not in control of this situation. And that's part of the hard part, right? Is because we're not in control. We have no control over what's happening around us right now. This thing, this virus has completely come in and affected all of us in ways that we never even imagined or possible. So when we're having those really kind of negative thoughts and we're getting caught up with those what ifs and being really fearful, that actually has a negative effect on our body. It has a physiological reaction. Our thoughts really do influence how we feel and how we interact with others and how we interact with the world. So really having that intentional mindset of, I need to check in with myself and check in with my thoughts. And sometimes we don't really do that on a day-to-day basis. And it's surprising when we do. But if you can check in with that and notice how you are thinking, and then combat that, or kind of do the opposite and say something compassionate to yourself and have self-compassion, that can help decrease that sense of ominousness or worry or overwhelm. We have this system in our body, it's called the threat system, which is adaptive in a sense that we needed that when we were back in the caveman days, right? We needed that threat system to alert us when there's danger so that we can fight back. But now in our current day, we don't have, we're not being threatened by kind of dangers that we would be threatened by in the wild or living in the wild. Our threats come from our thoughts, come from interactions with other people, and come from, this whole situation, right? Being in a pandemic and having to socially isolate, that's a threat to us. It feels like a threat. It feels dangerous. So our threat system turns on and we are kind of hypervigilant. We're over aware. We're really sensitive to things. And we have to get our body out of that threat system. And to do that, we have to activate our soothe system. So your soothe system is the way that it brings your body back down to a kind of a neutral state. So when you do that, you're able to, kind of think more rationally, you're able to think more compassionately, and you don't feel that sense of like, oh my God, like what happens, right? So in order to do that, it's really about self-compassion and noticing, hey, when we have something like this happening and it's really out of my control, this is affecting everybody. It's not just me, and I'm sure I'm not the only person feeling this way. That can be really important in kind of soothing that. We also are offering next week a self-compassion workshop or webinar. So that would be a great one to check out if you are having those sense of what ifs or kind of negative thoughts and are really having a hard time shutting that off. That might be something that you can check out as well. So I got a great kind of tip that I think would be helpful for everyone in terms of when you're dealing with anxiety and when you're dealing with this whole social distancing and social isolation, it's really important to check in with the important people in your life, whether that be a friend, whether that's family members, whether it's especially elderly family members. It's really important to check in on them as well as much as you can. And schedule that in your day. That's something that's really important, right? We can't do the normal things that we used to. So we can schedule in little check-ins with our friends. We can schedule in little check-ins with our family members. And that can be really helpful in maintaining our mental health and just having a space, if you're feeling down and feeling like you're stuck and how am I ever going to get through this? And this is shitty, excuse my language, but when you can have somebody to kind of talk to about that and connect, whether it be through phone or video chat, whichever way you feel more comfortable, it can really help ease some of those feelings and just give you a sense of connection. As human beings, we're wired for connection. That's a really important part of being human, is that we need connection with other people. And so our sense of belongingness right now is being threatened by this whole thing. But luckily, we live in a technology age, and we have access to lots of different ways to connect with people that doesn't just involve the phone, right? We have tons of options to video chat. We have text messaging, we have emails, we have phone calls, right? There's so many different platforms that we can use to check in with people and to get that connection that we desire. And it's important There's a very fine line between social distancing and social isolation. And again, we have another webinar coming out on that topic that could be helpful just to give you the sense of the difference. But it is really a difference between, it is a fine line between social isolation and social distancing. So you want to make sure that you're not isolated. You can be alone. You can be, if you live alone or whatever the case may be, you can be physically alone, but you don't have to be mentally alone, if that makes sense. You don't have to kind of block yourself off from the world and from others. You can still connect even though we're not allowed to physically connect. So there's a question here about that this pandemic doesn't really feel real. It's almost like, how is this happening in the world? How is this even going on? What does it mean for us, and why did this have to happen? And those are all really great questions, and I don't know if anyone can answer those fully. Honestly, I think it doesn't feel real. I can relate to that. It's I don't think I ever in my life expected to be kind of taken down by this virus in a sense, and it makes sense, but it's interesting to have this sense of it's almost like a movie. It's almost like we're in a movie and a plot, and it just doesn't really make sense. And I can agree with you on that. I don't know if we can answer that question. All we know is that for certain is that this is uncertain, and we're just kind of taking it day by day, live in the moment and be really present. This is an opportunity, and I think an important thing to do. And not that this isn't important in everyday life, but especially right now, to be mindful and to learn that skill of being present and kind of taking things one step at a time and not living too far into the future, because we have no control over what's going to happen. We have no idea how this is going to pan out. We're kind of just living day by day and kind of watching as things progress with the rest of the world. And all we can do is control ourselves. It can be frustrating to see the news and see how people are kind of reacting, or how we aren't reacting, or to see people who are still not really taking social distancing seriously, and all those things. But again, all you have control over is you. So take care of yourself, and that extends to your families as well if you have children or anything. But all you can do is control yourself and control your participation in all of this, and how you are reacting to social distancing, social isolation in the pandemic. So on the topic, we just mentioned families. I think it's important that we talk about children and how we can help them cope and manage with this whole fear and life change that they're feeling, because I can imagine that this is probably pretty scary for them. And again, kids are really social. They're used to being at school all day with their friends. I can imagine that this is pretty, it can be, I guess in some ways it might be exciting because they don't have to go to school. But for some children, it might be really scary. And I think, again, as a parent, kids are kind of sponges onto your behaviors and your actions. And I think if you can stay mindful and you can stay present with how you're doing in all of this, I think that's going to help your kids as well, because you're going to model that behavior to them. So allowing questions is going to be important. Allow them to ask questions and to express how they're feeling about this and express any concerns, and also help them with explaining things really clearly, and just understanding that they might have misinformation, or they might be misunderstanding certain things, and that you might have to explain it. So making sure you're giving them kind of accurate information rather than feeding into that fear, or feeding into the anxieties that are related to being in a pandemic situation. And just really spend time with your kids. I think, again, which is, I guess it could be a good thing and a bad thing as a parent. It's going to be a lot of extra work with kids home all the time, and for parents who are still working from home and then having to manage kids being home too, it's definitely a huge change and a transition. But spending time with them and just reconnecting with your kids in a different way than you have been before, because you have that time together, is going to be important too. And just be that sense of security for them, and allow them to play and to experience life still, even though this is still going on. There's definitely a lot of different ways you can incorporate the kids into the home stuff too, like asking them to help you with chores and asking them to help with cooking. can be ways to connect, but also it's still a learning opportunity, and also a way for them to get involved at home too, now that they're spending so much more time there. Mm. So one question comes in through on the topic of being skeptical or really cynical about everything that's going on in the news. And comparing this particular disease with other contagious diseases that we have, and how those diseases, like similar to the flu or TB, affect people annually. Um, but there's particularly a lot of anxiety about this pandemic in particular. I think one of the stats that I had seen um, previously, before even isolation started happening, was how much more this this particular virus, or coronavirus, has been portrayed in the news compared to other types of viruses. And I think it's really interesting, right? We're in an age of technology where media is explosive, and as soon as, it's almost like wildfire, it catches so quickly. And I think the reason why this is so blown up is just because of how widespread it is, right? It was very fast moving. It was very quick to spread, very fast, and it got serious really quick. I think I can't speak necessarily to the disease. I'm not a nurse or a doctor, I'm a therapist, but I think I can understand, right, the anxiety that comes from, it seems like this virus in particular is more blown up than any others that we've experienced. And I think that's because of the media. It's because of social media. It's because of how connected everyone is now. Facebook and Instagram, and there's so many platforms now, which we had before, I guess, in previous situations of viruses kind of spreading, like Ebola, I can think of. But at the same time, it wasn't as rampant as it was now. I think we're in an age where social media is our way of kind of raising political questions and getting on board with different topics and issues. And so we feel more of a sense of an opinion being raised on social media. And I think that's why, in particular, this one has been spread so quickly, because everyone has access to each other and to the internet, and we're all kind of talking about it and expressing our own opinions, which is great. But again, it can create anxiety for people when that's all that's everyone is talking about. It kind of takes over. I don't know, in the sense that there's necessarily something that we're not hearing or understanding from the news, but I think it's important to really check your facts. So make sure you're going to credible sources, right? Go to the CDC or the World Health Organization. Really tune into certain types of media so that you're getting as the best facts that you can. Sometimes Facebook, we can share posts that aren't factual. Instagram, same thing. Twitter, whatever social media you use, and the media outlet, in some senses, it is fact, but it's also biased in some ways. So I think, yeah, making sure you're definitely tuning into appropriate news channels, and making sure you get the right facts, and that can ease anxiety as well. And again, as we talked about in the beginning, also being mindful of limiting the amount of news that you're taking in at one time and in one day, because we can read and hear and listen to so many things all the time, and sometimes that can be overwhelming, and it's just a constant source of anxiety rather than it actually being informative. So checking in, is this helping me to understand and to learn and to know, or is this actually just really creating anxiety and making me more anxious than I need to be? Great question asked about children being stuck at home who are possibly in abusive environments. That is something that I thought about very early on in all of this. That's definitely a concern. Unfortunately, that is going to be a case for a lot of kids. I think if there's anything, if you have children who are in school, if there's a way to contact these kids and to get in touch with them through social media or through text messaging or any sort of way, just to check in on these kids and just make sure that if you had a concern before, just to check in as much as you can. I don't really know what they're doing in terms of the school system right now, if they're going to be starting online courses, if many kids are going to have that. So that's a really, really tricky one. And I appreciate the question, and I think I can relate to being worried about that. And at this point, just check in as much as you can, if you can, and where you can. And yeah, that's a tough one. That's definitely a tough one. I don't know if anyone else has any input on that, on ways that we could help with that. I would welcome any suggestions. Someone mentioned that it feels like when we walk outside, it's like an episode of The Walking Dead, and it feels like there's such a mistrust of people around us. And I know for myself, even just going for a walk outside, it seems to me as if people are, definitely more untrustworthy, and they seem to not want to even smile at you sometimes, which is interesting because a smile can't hurt, right? There is such a mistrust of people, and everyone, I think we're constantly in the back of our minds thinking, oh, who has this person been around? Did they have the virus? Could I catch it from, like, you're constantly kind of going into that mode of questions. But I think it's important, again, to recognize, like, as much as this is scary, as uncertain as we feel, as overwhelmed as we feel, this is a virus, just like any other virus. You can't catch it from a smile. You can't catch it from being close to somebody, right? You have to physically have the virus touch, I guess, your hand or whatever part of your body, and then you have to transfer that into your mouth, your nose, or your eyes, or right? So there's only certain entry points. Like, your skin isn't an entry point for this virus. So as much as you can, be mindful of how fearful you're feeling about other people, and also spread kindness. This is an opportunity, I guess, when we're out to be kind to others, and to just show some compassion to other people, and to know, hey, we're all in this together. We're all feeling scared. We're all uncertain. We all might feel this sense of unease or mistrust of people. And unless people are really invading your personal space at this time, sending them a little smile or a hey, or just kind of sending a little kindness their way can't hurt you. It's not going to make you contract anything. It's just an act of kindness. And I think if more people were doing that, and if we were all kind of on board with this idea of spreading kindness rather than perpetuating the fear, we might all be a little bit more at ease in public. And again, not to say that you can trust everyone, right? Some people aren't going to respect your personal boundaries and your kind of physical distance. But if that were to happen, then you deal with that when it happens, right? But just walking past somebody in a grocery store or out on the street, you're not going to catch anything from them. So if we can remind ourselves to just, instead of feeding into the fear that we're having, because again, it's not invalid to feel scared. I think this is a scary time, but we can choose whether we feed into that fear and whether we let it control us, or we can choose something different. And we can decide to kind of go the opposite way and lean into kindness or lean into compassion. Something that was brought up is talking about work-life balance while working at home. Great question. That's tough. Working from home versus going into work is such a different feeling, right? There's no expectation of getting up and looking any sort of way. You can kind of just roll out of bed. So again, going back to that idea of our schedules are so different now and have changed so much. And this can really affect our mental state. This is tough. It's hard to not have that schedule, especially if you're someone who's so used to kind of waking up at a certain time, getting out of the house at a certain time. Maybe you stop at Tim's or Starbucks before you go to work. There's such a routine in all of that. And as humans, we like predictability. We like to know what we're doing. So not having that routine, not having that predictability can create a sense of uneasiness or just unmotivation. And it's tricky. I think, again, going back to that idea of setting aside time, like setting aside a routine for yourself, right? Wake up at this time, have breakfast at this time, set aside certain hours for work. I know some people are, again, working from home with their kids, and that can be tricky. in terms of managing both work and having kids at home. But if you have a spouse or a partner in the home that can help you, it's kind of maybe setting aside shifts, right? So you take the morning shift, your partner takes the other shift, or if you don't have the option, do as much work as you can as the kids, kind of set the kids up with one thing, do work, etc. But it's really about, again, being mindful. And I think something I've noticed for myself personally is when I'm working from home, it's hard to turn it off. It's hard to have a normal work day because, again, we're working virtually, so emails constantly going. You can always be connected with your coworkers or to the work. So if you can be intentional about setting aside time for that, and allowing yourself the space to also enjoy free time as well. So it's about balancing work and kind of enjoyment, and allowing yourself to do that, because it can feel, again, our society is such a go, go, go kind of mentality. So because we're being forced so much to slow down, this could be really triggering for people, and really, we're not used to that. We're not used to that slowed down mode. And sometimes it can feel like if we're not going, we're not doing anything, we're not being productive. But you're still able to be productive at home, and you can still work from home if you can, if you're lucky enough to. But again, you have to be intentional about that and set a schedule and make sure you stick to that and not let yourself kind of either work too much or too little, right? We have to find that balance, and it's going to take time. I mean, it's not going to be an easy transition. I think all of us can relate to that idea that the last week has been really hard. And it's been an adjustment, and there's been some hiccups, and maybe things haven't worked out as well as you had hoped. But that's okay, because we're all in the same boat, and we're all trying to adjust and transition into this as best as we can. So another question came in about loved ones who are ill, and who are at the hospital, and because of isolation, they aren't able to see them and can barely speak to them. It can be very tricky when you have a family member, a parent or a loved one who is older, and even if they're not in the hospital but are in a senior's home that are on lockdown right now because to prevent the spread of COVID. This is really hard, and I think there's a lot of guilt associated with this, because we take on, especially if it's a parent, we take on responsibility for our parents when they're older, and you want to be there for them and support them, and it can be scary to not be able to connect with them in this time and to check in on them and make sure they're okay. Especially at seniors homes, I know sometimes there's a lot of feelings of worry about how the person's doing and what the kind of care they're getting. And even at a hospital, right, you don't know what kind of care they're getting at that point. So I think there's a lot of worry and a lot of guilt and a lot of fear around how they're being treated and how they're making out, and is anyone going to notice when they're really off, and those subtle things that maybe you could pick up on that maybe someone who doesn't know them very well isn't going to be able to. It can be really hard on our mental state to not be able to connect with our family members who are elderly and who are ill. But again, do the best you can. That's all you can do. You can't. It's not like you can go in there and bombard and break the system and put them at risk to kind of protect them in that way. But just connect with them as much as you can through the phone, or if they have an iPad or whatever the case may be, just connect with them as much as you can. If they're in a senior's home, call the home and ask for updates. And just connect as much as you can. And again, just know that this isn't your fault. It's not your choice that you have to do it this way. You're not in control of the situation. If you could be in control, you would be definitely visiting and doing all those things. But it's just, this is to keep them safe. So it might feel wrong. It might feel like you're leaving them, or you might have a sense of guilt that you're not able to connect with them. But again, this is also to keep them safe. So as much as it's not a great feeling, and as much as it's hard, at the end of the day, it's not, you're doing it for the right reasons. And again, it's temporary. So it's not going to be a forever thing. And we have to just trust that this is in their best interest. And as much as we can limit interaction and keep them safe, the longer their lives will be. On the same kind of tone, do you have any advice to comfort elderly relatives who might be scared or anxious? Again, it's hard. I can't imagine the type of fear that they would be feeling, and the anxiety related to a pandemic situation is especially high for elderly people because they are at a high risk, right? And I think that they're aware of that. And I also think that it's also, as you get older, you become less able to adapt to change, which is due to brain function, but it makes it harder to deal with something like this. So again, they're dealing with a lot of anxiety. As much as we're all anxious and kind of feeling afraid, so are they. Again, just be compassionate, listen to what they're saying, and don't try and use kind of terms like get over it, or, it's going to be over soon, like, don't allow them to feel what they're feeling and allow them to express that, and then kind of try and comfort them through just acknowledging how they're feeling and being like, I'm scared too. This is a really uncomfortable time. It's very scary. But again, reassure them that, this is temporary. This is for their best interests, to keep them safe, and just talk to them. I mean, something that's often helpful is to kind of jog, especially with elderly people. I'm sure everyone can relate, but when you get them talking about their childhoods or how it was when they were growing up, and kind of bringing up those memories, it can be really interesting to hear their perspective. And hear what they have to say. So as much as you can talk to them and kind of, make them bring up questions, ask them questions that you may not have asked before about what their life was like, and what they've gone through, and just get them talking about that kind of stuff. And it helps to take their mind off of that, but it also helps them to kind of share information with you, and maybe you can hear stories that you've never heard from them before. Good question about being a single parent, and when the child asks about where the other parent is and if they're going to be able to visit and what they're doing, especially if this parent hasn't always been necessarily active in their lives. What is the best way to communicate with my child when the other parent is inconsistent? Um, that is I think this is a topic that is important in terms of not only a pandemic situation, but just in general. Um, it's tricky, especially, I think right now, I guess maybe in a sense you're lucky because you're able to kind of talk about how, well, right now, we're in isolation, we can't really have visitors, and it's not safe to kind of be going out and doing a bunch of the same things, so we can have that excuse a little bit. um, I guess in some ways children know what's going on even when we don't tell them. They're very intuitive, and they can pick up on certain things, and I think they know a lot more than we give them credit for sometimes. So as much as you are comfortable being honest with them about what's going on, and kind of where the parent is at, and not to throw the other parent under the bus, and kind of say, like, they don't want to be there, they don't want to be a part of your life. It's more about, yeah, being honest to a point where delivering it in a kind way, I guess. And I guess on your end too, trying as best as you can to get in touch with that person as much as you can, but also being aware that you're doing the best that you can on your end, and whether this other parent wants to be involved is their own choice. And all you can do is try your best to have that parent involved if they want to be, but otherwise to provide your child with support, and to allow them to be frustrated if they need to be frustrated about that, and feel sad if they're sad about it, and just reassure them that you love them, and that the other parent loves them, and they're doing the best that they can, and that you are also doing the best that you can. So don't take on too much pressure to overcompensate for that other person, or to um, to create the sense of like, this is my fault that they're not reaching out, or like take on that blame because it's not your fault. Again, this person is an adult and they're able to make their own choices, and for whatever reason, maybe there's some things going on that that are preventing them from being able to be there at the time. But all you can do is be there and to be that support system for your child. And again, be as honest as you're comfortable being with them. And again, not to throw that parent under the bus, because at the end of the day, that's their parent and they're always going to love them. But to be honest about what's going on. So tools, another question came in about tools to share, that I can share about grounding through anxiety when it's really high. That's a great one. Something that I like to use a lot, and I tell this to clients all the time, and it's so simple, is just take 3 big deep breaths and really focus on kind of the air pulling in. Even bring up your shoulders as you go up, and then as you release that air, really let your body relax and kind of let the tension melt away. I think we don't breathe. It sounds silly, but we don't breathe as much as we should during the day. So I think it's important to check in with ourselves, and you can even set a little timer on your phone or a little notification of like, hey, take a breath, right? So if you can take 3 big deep breaths and really focus on the air going in and how that feels, and expanding your chest and your lungs, and then really exhaling and letting that tension go. That can be a really good way to just, it kind of snaps your nervous system back into a more calm state. And it's a simple thing that you can do to help decrease your anxiety in that moment. Another great thing to do is, it's a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 activity. So it's a grounding activity, and it's when we're feeling anxious, it's because we're living in that future sense, right? Or we're like, what's going to happen? I don't know what's going on. We're living in the future. We're not in the present. So if anything we can do to bring us back to the present is going to be really helpful in decreasing anxiety and also bringing down your nervous system, because anxiety is also related to physiological kind of agitation, and our bodies feel uneasy. So the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is you focus on 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. So when you do that, again, it kind of activates your senses and engages you to the present moment. And that can help. It takes your mind away from that future-oriented anxious thinking, and it allows you to connect with what's happening right now in this moment. These things take practice. It's not something that is going to work necessarily right away for you. But things, like the deep breathing, like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, meditation is a great one. And I think there's a lot of misconception about meditation in that you have to just sit in stillness and be quiet and you can't have any thoughts. But meditation is more about, again, connecting to the present moment, connecting to where you're at, and paying attention on purpose. A lot of times we're kind of always up in our heads and we live up here. But when we can connect with our bodies and how we're feeling and the present, it can decrease some of that anxiety, because the anxiety is caused by our thoughts and what we're thinking and how we're living in our heads rather than living within our body. So meditation is a great one. There's lots of great apps. I personally use Insight Timer, which is a free one. It has like thousands and thousands of free meditations. I got a comment about Breath Ball, which is a great app, and apparently it works really well, which is great. Thank you for that. You can go online, and even on YouTube, you can Google meditations. Another one is affirmations. That's one that I think is really helpful, especially with anxious thinking and kind of those negative thinking styles. If you can get used to telling yourself positive things like, I am safe, I'm okay, like I'm going to get through this, like just little simple things like that can be really helpful in again, combating those negative styles and combating that anxiety. Excuse me. So mindfulness, grounding yourself through the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, deep breathing. There's tons of these things on the internet. You can do a Google search and you'll find tons and tons of different hits. So you have to find what works for you though. not everything you're going to connect with. Not everyone is going to like the same type of thing. So you just have to kind of try different things out, and what a better time than when we're socially isolated and have nothing but time, for most of us. But yeah, just finding what works for you. Yoga is a great practice if you can get into that. Even just light stretching, anything that you can do to engage your senses, to engage your breath, and to just be in the moment and not be kind of stuck in that wheel in our head that brings us into the future. Great question coming in about boundaries. Okay. So the question comes in about family members using this pandemic to cross boundaries. So calling too much, expecting a lot of calls or texts, more than you'd be comfortable with, and using this and doing this as a way for them to cope. But as at the same time, this is also kind of crossing boundaries with people. Great question. Again, this is going to bring out a different side to a lot of people, right? When we're in a crisis like this, when we're in a pandemic, it brings out a different side. It brings out a lot of fear. It brings out maybe unhelpful coping styles that aren't present in regular life because we're fearful and because everything's so uncertain and our normal coping mechanisms aren't available to us. So all I can say about that is that even if somebody else has unhealthy boundaries, doesn't mean you have to have unhealthy boundaries. So again, knowing what you're in control of, which is yourself. So as long as you can maintain your boundaries during this time and kind of know what your limits are. So not allowing anybody to cross them too often. You have to stand up for yourself, but also you have to be really strict on what your boundaries are. So if you're kind of wishy-washy and not sure, then yes, of course people are going to cross your boundaries because you're not certain of those in yourself. So maybe the solution to somebody calling or texting too much is, put your phone on do not disturb, or put it in the other room for an hour or so, and just you disconnect from that phone, and you decide that you can call and text back when you're available and when you're ready to. The good thing about a phone is that you can decide when to answer and you can decide when you text back. You're not being forced, or there's no expectation for you to answer just because somebody has texted you or called you. You get to decide when you answer. So again, setting those limits for yourself and setting those boundaries for you. And also being compassionate and mindful to the fact that, this person probably is just really struggling with this whole thing. And again, this is their way of coping. And maybe just having an honest conversation, if you can, with that person, if you feel comfortable to, and just say, I've just been noticing that I've been on my phone a lot lately. So the next week or so, I'm just going to be really mindful of how much I have my phone. So, I'll text when I can, I'll call when I can, but I'm really going to try and kind of limit my time on my phone. So you can say it in a nice way. You don't have to kind of get frustrated with them and yell at them and be like, stop calling me. But at the same time, you can also kind of set that boundary and set that limit with them. Whether they choose to listen or not is up to them. But there's ways that you on your end can decide to act on that. So, and it's hard when it's a family member because we feel that pressure to always instantly respond. And I think just as humans, when we get a notification, we kind of quickly want to respond. But again, you have to just be mindful of your boundaries. Is this going to be, do I really want to have this conversation right now? Maybe I don't have the mental energy right in this moment, but maybe if I put my phone away, do something for me, get my work done, whatever the case may be, in an hour, I'll be able to talk to them. So you can set the tone and set the limit for the messages and how much you want to answer or not answer, while also being mindful of the fact that this person is reaching out to you because they love you or care about you, or just they're struggling with their own emotions and they really need support too. So also being mindful of yourself, but then being mindful that this is a particular kind of unreal situation and circumstance, and people are going to cope in ways that might be unhelpful at this time. Great question about couples who are now forced to be together 24/7 and normally who are working away and now being at home together all the time. this is a big adjustment, right? Because you're so used to, like I said earlier, we get into a routine, we get comfortable with our lives and how things are going, and we really get set in our ways, and not in a bad way, but just because that's our everyday routine. And it's hard when when that changes, regardless of the situation or the circumstance. So right now, because we're forced to have it to change, you're being put in a position where for the first time you are constantly with your significant other, which is I mean, some people might think that's a good thing, but it is hard, right? You're having to readjust to another person in your space all the time. And if you're used to kind of be spending the majority of your time apart, that can be really tricky. Again, I think as long as you can be really mindful about your time and making sure you're taking enough time for yourself, so you're not constantly with that other person. If you have the ability to be in another room, just kind of separate yourself for a couple hours, do your own thing, and really set boundaries on, hey, like, even though we're forced to be in our home together all the time now, there's still things and still routines that I need to do for me, to maintain my own mental health, but then also have time together and time for work. So it's really about getting honest with yourself and tuning into you and what you need, and deciding, like, what do I need for me, for my mental state to make this work. There's going to be times where you guys snap at each other. That's pretty normal, especially again in this transition period. But again, there's ways, as long as you can check in with you. And again, all we can control is ourselves. So if we can check in with ourselves, how am I doing today? Do I need more or less time alone? Am I feeling a little bit uneasy? Is my anxiety a little higher? Like, how am I doing personally? And then deciding to structure your day around doing things that are going to help that and avoiding things that might kind of increase that. So if spending time, say, in the kitchen where your spouse is working and listening to them on business calls or typing away or just like kind of doing their thing, if you're feeling anxious and that's making it worse, then just like politely and nicely excuse yourself and say, you know what, I'm just going to go into the other room for a couple hours. Do you mind just like giving me my space and just letting me be? So it's really about communication with your partner and just understanding what it is you both need on either side, and having respect for that boundary, and not taking it as a personal offense of they don't want to be around you or you don't want to be around them, but just like, this is a time where we have to kind of get honest with ourselves and our boundaries, because we're forced to live in a really small space and there's not other ways to deal with that. So yeah, just do the best you can. Know that not everything's going to be perfect, and it's an adjustment period. But just really tune into yourself and communicate with your partner about what it is you need, what it is that you want, how you're feeling that day, and just be really honest, while also holding space for each other and each other's emotions, and know that, again, emotions are heightened right now. And so just being compassionate to that as well. So a question came in about helping people that have mental health issues or addiction issues, and who may be struggling to recognize the problem, and being able to understand that there is something there that needs to be addressed. This is another tricky one, right? Because as I've been saying, all you can control is yourself. So when you're in a situation like that, when you can recognize in somebody that they're struggling, or that they might be coping again with unhelpful things like substances, it can be really hard, and it's triggering for us, especially if we really care about the person, because you just want them to be healthy and happy. But at the same time, you want to help them and you want to make sure that they're okay. But again, at the end of the day, we can't control other people. We can gently ask questions and become curious about what's going on for them. And I think that's something that might be important with mental health or addiction. Like, oftentimes we jump into that help mode and we jump into solution mode related to these things, like, and rightfully so. but get curious about it. What's going on for the person? Like, why is their mental health declining? Like, why is it that they feel that they're using substances more frequently? Like, ask questions, and maybe they're not ready for that. Maybe they won't be open to that conversation. But if you can approach it in a curious way and just be interested in how they're doing and kind of where this is coming from, you might have more of an open conversation, and then that can help them and lead them to being more aware of what's going on for them, and maybe even how it might be affecting you, and how you might be feeling about it as well. And sometimes it takes other people and their awareness to kind of make us open our eyes a little bit more. But again, instead of kind of approaching it about, well, you're doing this and this is affecting me, be curious about what's going on for them, because mental health and addiction doesn't just come out of nowhere, right? There's a reason why these things are happening, whether that person knows it or not. But if you can ask questions, if you can be curious, if you can be non-judgmental and empathetic towards what they're going through, it might be helpful for them to have that conversation and then realize it through that. Another thing I want to say, I guess, is just be really mindful of how it's affecting you. If this is something, if being around this person is triggering for you, if it's really difficult and it's starting to affect your mental health, to just tune into that as well, and not give too much of yourself or give too much of your energy and time if it's really affecting you or bothering you. And not to say that you can't be there to support and to help, but you can only do so much, and knowing what your limit is and knowing what your boundaries are on that is really important in staying grounded during that time, and not getting caught up in other people's problems, I guess. And again, they are in control of themselves to a degree, and they have to make the choice that they want help or not. And that can be a really hard part of dealing with a family member or loved one or friend or whoever it is who has mental health problems, is that you want them to be better and you want to help them, but sometimes they don't want that help. And it's not because they don't love you or don't trust you or whatever. It's just it's maybe too hard to confront it right now, and maybe they're not willing to. That's a really good question, and that's a pretty big topic too. That's one that it's definitely hard. So on one hand, you have to be supportive and be curious about what's going on for them. But on the other hand, you have to be really mindful of how this is affecting you, and making sure you're not getting overwhelmed with this situation, and also being mindful of not jumping into solution mode and trying to fix, because at the end of the day, they have to choose that for themselves. How do we shut our minds off from getting enough quality sleep, or so that we can get enough quality sleep? That's a really good question. And again, I think that goes back to right now, it's really easy to fall into the trap of scrolling on social media at night, or kind of if you watch the news or whatever the case may be, or maybe you work really late into the evening because you're struggling to kind of find that work-life balance. So all of these things, and even actually now that we're forced to work from home, that can make, again, it's hard to separate work from home. So that can create even just like unconsciously or subconsciously the sense that like you're not able to shut down at night like you normally would when you go to work and then come home. So it's kind of interfering with that process too. So shutting your mind off at night, I think, again, going back to kind of scheduling something out. So maybe making sure that an hour and a half before you want to go to sleep, that you're shutting off work. You're not looking at emails. You're doing something that relaxes you or calms you down, whatever that is for you. And setting aside that space to just relax. Maybe you meditate, maybe you do some yoga, maybe you take a bath. Again, there's tons of different options for that. But just making sure that you get into a little kind of nighttime routine almost to shut your mind off. So it might not be what you want to do. You're like, oh, I just want to watch Netflix again for another hour, which is fine if that's what helps you cope and what helps bring you down. But if that's not helping, then being intentional and being like, hey, I need to do my deep breathing for 5 minutes before I go to sleep, or I need to turn my phone off and put it away for a couple hours before I go to bed. Or just, again, checking in with you. What is it that you need? What is it that you're struggling with? And how can I cope with that in a healthy way? So whatever that the case is for you, you just have to kind of find the right ways that work for you and work to calm your anxiety, and really put those into practice, and not just let them go, because it's easy, I think, with self-care stuff like meditation or mindfulness or things like that, when we're in a stressful situation, when we're kind of living in our heads and we're really fearful and we've got a lot going on, a lot of stress, self-care is the first thing to go. It's the first thing that we put aside, and it's the last thing we want to do. So again, checking in and being like, okay, how can I know that I'm feeling anxious. I know that I'm struggling to get to sleep. How do I incorporate some of the things that help me calm down back into my routine? And it doesn't have to be some huge thing where you meditate for 20 minutes and whatever. Like, it could be a quick, something easy, something small, just taking big deep breaths and just really allowing yourself to calm down for 5 minutes before you go to sleep. But finding what works for you, you know yourself best, you know what helps you the most. So just being intentional about practicing that on a day-to-day basis, and not allowing it to slip just because, we're stressed and we have a lot going on. So that takes a lot of kind of mental focus on our end, in terms of kind of, shutting down that thing that makes us anxious and really focusing in on the thing that helps bring us more relaxed and calm. Hmm. This is a good question, and I think something that maybe we can all relate to at the moment, in terms of a sense of guilt about being able to work from home and still bringing money in, where your partner may not be able to work right now and isn't making money. Um, that sense of guilt, um, it's not yours, I guess, if that makes sense. I think you're feeling empathetic towards what they're feeling, but you're also personalizing it in a sense, and you're feeling responsible for the fact that they're not able to work, when in reality you have no control over the fact that they're working, or not, and you have no control over if they're making money or not. It's unfortunate, and and you can feel for them, and you can feel worried and scared with them if that's going to affect you as well, them not being able to work. But I think it comes down to that personalization of that, of the almost taking on the responsibility, or the blame that your partner isn't working, when in reality you have no control over that. I think when we're going through something like that and we feel that sense of guilt, it's again important to acknowledge that, and to say, you know what, like, and maybe even check in with where that guilt is coming from, like what's underneath the guilt. Is there something underneath that? um, and all you can do is support that person. You can't change what's going on for them. Again, like I've been saying, we have no control over this, and unfortunately a lot of people are losing their jobs because of all of this. Thankfully, there are some things coming out from the government to help with these things, and to help kind of ease the blow that the economy is taking right now because of COVID, and because of being laid off. um, but it isn't your fault that your partner isn't working. It isn't your fault that they're not bringing money. And I think, if anything, maybe try and shift that guilt that you're feeling into gratitude that you are still able to work, and that you are still bringing in money, so that one half of your partnership is still able to work. And otherwise, just be really compassionate to what your partner's going through. Listen with intent to listen, not to provide a solution, or not to help them through, or fix the problem, but listen to just listen. Oftentimes I think we jump into solution mode when our partner brings us something, and we forget to just tune in and to listen to what they're feeling, rather than quickly jumping into, okay, well, why don't you try this, or maybe you can go do that. And yes, those are helpful things, and keep those in your back pocket, and kind of suggest them when the time is right. But if your partner is just really struggling with the idea, like, it really sucks that I'm not able to work. I'm feeling really down about it, and it's hard not making money, and they're worried about finances, or whatever the case may be. Like, just be supportive in that, and understand that this is a real feeling. And I think a lot of us can relate to it. It's not, again, we're all going through this together in certain ways, and maybe some of us are feeling the brunt of the financial aspect of it a little bit more than others. But at the same time, we are all being affected by this social distancing and social isolation in one way or another, whether it's financially, whether it's mental health wise, we're all being affected by it. So you can try and shift that guilt and that responsibility that you're taking on for the fact that you're still working, and just shift that into one, gratitude for your own situation, that your work allows you to still work from home, but then also just have some compassion for your partner and listen to support rather than to fix. And also once you listen and to support, then you guys can find solutions together, or have the conversation of, well, what can we do to help the situation together, and not kind of jump into that. Allow space for the listening part and then into the solution part, if that makes sense. So another great point is being made about essential service workers. And if we have any in the room, thank you so much for all you're doing. And the fear that comes up about needing to work and being on the front lines and being basically at risk for during this time, and how we can kind of help manage their stress, because I think this is a really stressful time for essential workers, right? Everyone's being laid off and being told to stay at home, but they're being asked to go against that and leave their home and put themselves on the front lines and maybe be at risk. And that can be really scary. I think we have to acknowledge the great work that they're doing and the importance of the work that they're doing, and really anyone who is still working and is working on the front lines, to really acknowledge how the necessary and important the work that they're doing is, and while at the same time also trying to help them cope through this too, because they're in a special situation where they're going to be really stressed out, and it's going to be a really hard time, and they're going to be overworked and really exhausted, and helping them maybe through something that you've learned through this, or through one of the other webinars that we're kind of putting on. If you can learn ways that to help them cope and kind of pass that information on, that would be helpful. But I think something that's important, if you know a frontline worker, or if you live with one, or whatever the case may be, is to check in and ask them what they need, right? And because right now they're having to, I mean, we all have our fears. I know for myself, like I have my fears and all of that and my worries, but at the same time I'm able to work and I'm at home and I'm safe from harm, I guess. But for them, they're having those anxieties and those fears, but they have to go out and still work and still be in the danger zone, I guess, if you want to say it that way. So they're dealing with not only the regular kind of anxiety and stress that comes with a pandemic, but they're also having to work through it and be out there and be in the public and deal with other people's anxieties and worries as well. So just taking time to ask them what they need and being supportive in that. And again, listening to listen and listening to support, and not to provide solutions, but just acknowledging like, hey, you've had a really hard day. You're going through a lot. This is a crazy situation. None of us have ever been in this kind of situation before. And what is it that I can do to support you? What is it that you need right now? And again, being very, congratulatory isn't the right word, but just acknowledging what kind of great work that they're doing and the impact that they're having and the importance of their role as a service worker and as somebody who is putting themselves at risk to help others. One came in through any specific advice for people who experience medical anxiety. So I think this is something, again, that's going to be really triggered by this pandemic and by the outburst of a virus that can, as we've known, for certain people, and that can be really really challenging and can be deadly. I think for those who experience medical anxiety, again, all the same things apply in terms of checking in with how you're doing and where that anxiety is coming from. And again, if you have those kind of fears, limiting the amount of news you're taking in or how much information you're taking on during the day. And also checking in about where that comes from, right? Why are we afraid of this particular medical condition, or why are we afraid of this certain thing? Maybe it stems from a childhood experience. Maybe it stems from, a bad experience that you've had as an adult. But really checking in, why am I feeling that way? Where does this come from? And how can I tell myself, or because when we have anxiety, when we have a fear about something, it's because we feel unsafe about something, or we have a loss of a sense of security. But if we can check in about where that's coming from, why it is we might be feeling that way, and also acknowledge, like, this fear it's living in my mind. I'm perpetuating this fear in a certain sense with the way that I'm thinking about it. So how can I shift my thoughts away from, oh my gosh, I'm going to get COVID and it's going to be really bad, to, or whatever the case may be, whatever your medical anxiety is, and shift it to, well, what's the facts about that? Like, am I really going to get it? And if I do get it, what's the worst thing that could happen? And again, your mind can kind of run away with you on that a little bit. But just being really realistic about it, and kind of checking in with how you're feeling and how you're doing, and how do I limit the way that I'm taking in information that might be triggering my anxiety? How do I calm myself down when I am feeling anxious? What are things I can tell myself to kind of combat those negative thoughts? So a question came in about restlessness, and this kind of happening at a certain time of day, um, and not knowing if this is just kind of regular cabin fever, and just because I've been at home all day. Is it anxiety? If it is just a case of, like, I have to remove myself from where I am at the time. Um, Restlessness is a tough one. Again, kind of going, I said this earlier, it's hard to kind of stare at the same four walls all day. So the restlessness could just be because you have been stuck at home all day. We're so used to being so stimulated all the time with many different things. And while we still have technology and we still are able to kind of get online and do those kind of things, even if we're used to kind of always going out and coming home and kind of going to work and being able to socialize with people or whatever it is, when you're stuck at home all day, it's a change in routine and your body isn't used to it. And you can become restless. This could be compounded by the fact that you might have anxiety. Um, I think again, something that's really important for everyone in this time is to keep your body moving. It can be really easy to kind of stay sedentary during times like this, where you aren't able to kind of go to the gym or really go out and do things. So it's easier to stay kind of stuck on the couch and doing that. And there's no problem with that. But again, there has to be a balance between staying kind of sedentary and then also being more active and getting out and doing things and moving your body, and doing that in a way that's being kind to yourself, right? Because when we kind of sit too long, or we are too sedentary, it can really affect how we feel about ourselves. It has effects on how our body feels. We can get little aches and pains from sitting in one position too long. So something that's important is to get yourself outside. Go for a little walk around your neighborhood if you're able to. Do a little, like a 10-minute workout in your room or in your house. Just changing up your routine a little bit can be helpful. Maybe it is a case of, like, I just need to get out of the house for 15 minutes and just walk around for a quick 15-minute walk even can be helpful. If you're noticing that it's happening at a specific time of day, perhaps there's something to be said about what's happening at that time of day that's making you really restless. And maybe anxious? Is there something in particular that happens at that time of day? Maybe the news gets turned on. Maybe whatever the case is, like, check in. Is it something that's happening at the time? Or is this just kind of a buildup of I've been home all day, I've been sitting in the same position, I haven't been able to move my body? And again, finding ways to combat that, whether it be through a walk or doing a little workout or just doing something different than you have been all day. We're having to find really creative ways right now to entertain ourselves, and find variety in our days. And that can be really tricky. It can be really difficult to do that. And like I said, it's easy to fall into the, well, I'm actually going to take time to just watch Netflix and enjoy myself. And that's great. It's great to take that time that you need. But when it becomes too much, and when you're starting to notice, like, I'm not feeling good with this anymore, then it's like, okay, I have to do something else. So finding something that works for you, whether it be kind of having a dance party, whether it be in your living room, whether it be engaging in some sort of a hobby like painting, music, sewing, crafting, cooking, just anything that you can try that would be kind of get you out of that little funk that you're feeling, would be a helpful way to deal with that and cope with that. Okay. So one came in talking about the difference between self-care and overindulgence. This is a really interesting one. Again, we were in a space where we might have the time to overindulge and to maybe allow ourselves to do something that we haven't been able to do, and to really, like, that we've always wanted to do, right? Maybe it's exciting for you to be able to sit at home and watch Netflix all day and really binge on a show that you've been wanting to watch, because you haven't had the time to before. And I think that that's great to acknowledge that. And again, finding balance between allowing yourself enjoyment and to allow yourself, to have fun during this time is really important. But when it becomes problematic is when it might be interfering with the things that you might need to get done. So if it's interfering with getting work done, or maybe you're not maybe taking care of yourself as much as you could because you're getting kind of stuck in the routine of just kind of binging those shows and not doing anything for you. Something that's important when you're forced to self-isolate and you're forced to be home all the time, it's really it's hard to not get stuck in a rut, because we're not having that variety and we're not being forced to leave our homes. We have to stay. So self-care are things that intentionally make you feel good, that you do on purpose to help your mental state, to help your physical state, to help you feel good. It's something, to care for yourself, right? Self-care. I think the difference between self-care and knowing the difference between self-care and overindulging is that overindulging in the end might have a negative sense to it, if that makes sense. So you might feel, say, after a long day of just kind of laying on the couch, and in the beginning it feels good and you're like, yes, this feels amazing to just be able to sit here and watch the show that I want to watch and kind of snack and just do those things. But at the end of the day, you might have that, another day, like I didn't really do anything, or you might have kind of like a backache, or you might be feeling really restless, or whatever the case may be. I think that's the difference between overindulgence and self-care. So when it feels good, it feels good. Self-care feels good. Self-care lifts us up. Self-care makes us feel energized for the most part, or relaxes us, and it just gives us a little boost. Overindulgence will leave us feeling a little bit depleted, or it might create kind of maybe more of a negative self-talk. So I think that's kind of like the indicator between do it until it doesn't feel good anymore, I guess. So if you're kind of watching shows and it feels really good and you're into it and it's nice, enjoy it while you can. But then also be mindful of when it's not feeling good anymore and maybe switching it up a little bit. Again, we kind of have a lot of time on our hands right now, so it's not like the show's going anywhere. You can always pick up where you left off. You can take a quick hour walk, do a little workout, cook something great for dinner, and then you can come back to it if you want to. So just being mindful of the balance between those two things, and being productive while also giving yourself space to enjoy your time and enjoy the things that you may not have gotten to before, and just tuning in with yourself. Everything is really about being mindful of, how does this make me feel? How do I feel when I'm doing it? Another one coming in about a lack of motivation. As I've been saying, during a pandemic, it's so easy to lose motivation. It's when you're stuck at home and when you can't really get out and do the things that you normally do, it really does feel like we're not doing anything, or we're being lazy, or we're not whatever word you want to use or label you want to use. I think something that it's important to check in with is we as humans and in our society are, again, always go, go, go. Our worth sometimes we place on our productivity. So if we're not out working, if we're not out kind of go, 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 and like constantly busy and always have things to do and always something on the schedule, without those things, we might feel unmotivated, or we might feel, lazy, or that we're not doing anything, or whatever it is. So I think it's important to acknowledge, hey, we're in a space where, things are hard, things are different, things are changing. I'm not able to get out and do the same things that I've wanted to do. And that's going to lead to a sense of being demotivated, because again, we're so primed to always go, go, go. It doesn't mean, I don't know if that's a valid feeling, right? That lack of motivation, because we're not go, 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 and we're not able to, that's not our choice, right? This is being put on us as a safety measure, as a way to combat something bigger than us. So we have to kind of slow down. So if you're feeling that lack of motivation, again, check in, like, am I used to being slowed down? Am I used to not having so much to do on my plate? Like, is my lack of motivation because I'm slow, I'm not go, go, go anymore? And then on the same hand, what is the value that I place on being go, go, go? Am I somebody who places my idea of my worth on that idea of being always kind of productive and always going and doing things? So if that's how you perceive it, maybe it's about checking in and saying, well, I am worthy, and I'm not a lazy person. I'm just feeling a lack of motivation right now. I'm feeling that that I'm struggling with this whole pandemic. And just being aware of yourself, and asking yourself questions, and being curious about why you feel the way that you do. If you're feeling really unmotivated and struggling, like I said, make a routine for yourself so you can still feel that sense of productivity. Maybe changing your perspective on what is productive versus what isn't productive, right? Before, productivity was probably going to work and making money and kind of getting tasks done and having a full schedule and being busy. But now, how can we still feel productive at home? Maybe there's something that you have been wanting to do at home that you haven't had the chance to because you've been busy and not at home. So maybe it's about taking on that home project that you've wanted to, that you haven't been able to. Maybe it's about decluttering your closet. Maybe it's taking up a new hobby, reading that book that you've always wanted to read. So it's just about being creative and finding new ways to motivate yourself, or new ways to fill your time that you haven't been able to before. So another question comes in about the readjustment period after all this is over, and when we're going to be having to go back to work. And again, we're in a transition period now, transitioning into being at home, but we'll also be in a transition period when this is all over and we're going back to work and we're getting back into normal routine. I think, again, during that time, there's also going to be some fears, I would imagine, about, well, what if this isn't all over? What if we all go back to work and this whole thing kind of spikes up again? Or what if my skills have decreased over the time that I'm not at work? Or what if I don't know everything again? What if I have a lot of anxiety about going back to work, and I really developed a routine at home, and then now this is being changed again? All of these things are really valid and definitely make so much sense, and are likely going to be things that we experience as we transition through this time, and transition back into normal life. I think one thing to keep in mind, again, is that everyone's going through this together. We're all going through this whole social distancing together and isolation together. And we're all kind of sharing similar feelings, and we're all kind of worried and wondering about the same things. And the same thing is going to happen when we have to transition back into going back to work and getting back out there. It's going to take time. It's going to bring up a lot of kind of triggers or kind of anxieties, and that's okay. That's going to be a part of the process. So just being compassionate with yourself and understanding that this is a transition period, and allowing yourself to be uncomfortable with it. kind of accessing those things that help us feel good, and kind of ways and tips and tricks to decrease our anxiety are going to be really important to use during that time. Um, and again, just checking in. How do I feel? How is this making me feel? Is this triggering me? And if it is, how do I decrease the level of anxiety that I'm feeling right now? Um, and just, yeah, being compassionate to everyone at the time and saying, you know what, we're all in this together. We've all gone through this thing, this crazy experience together. And how can we help each other? How can we lean on each other during this time to support us, and help us through this whole thing? I think transition periods are a really um, interesting topic, and I think it brings up a lot of, we feel a lot of responsibility to know how to deal with or to handle, um, change, or to handle transition periods, and we feel like we should have the answers, or we should be able to cope with all of this, or we should be able to be okay. And in reality, I mean, this situation in particular is so foreign to all of us. None of us have ever lived through something like this. None of us have ever experienced something like this. So how are any of us supposed to know how to cope and how to handle this situation? We've never been through it before. No one has. So there's no way of us knowing how this is going to go, how we should or shouldn't be coping with it. And everyone copes differently, right? As we've been talking about, some people may cope in unhelpful ways, and some people may really take on the challenge of finding helpful ways of coping. But whatever it is that you decide, or whatever it is that you choose, there's no right or wrong here. Like, you're coping to the best of your ability with what you have, and you're doing the best that you can, and that's all that we're doing right now. Everything is kind of day by day. We're just taking it, in stride and hoping for the best. So taking off that kind of pressure, that personal responsibility that we might have about knowing how to handle this, or knowing how we should be feeling, and kind of taking off that expectation that we have to know, because no one knows how this is going to go, and no one has any expectation on people to know what to do. We're all kind of just living in this uncertainty, which is really hard, and that causes anxiety for a lot of people. But we're all in this together, and we're all coping and dealing as best as we can. And all we can do, I guess, is decide for ourselves to make choices about how we're coping, and to make choices that are going to help us, and maybe influence other people in our lives to cope in better ways, and just, yeah, do the best that we can. So question came in about the importance of keeping hygiene routines up, and the importance of that on our mental health. Again, great question, because I think it is something that's really important. Again, when we're home and we're constantly in our own space, we might not feel the need to get ready in the morning. Even if we are working from home, we might not get ready if we're not going out during the day, like we mostly aren't. Maybe we don't feel the sense like, oh, I don't really need to change out of my pajamas, and I don't really need to kind of, put makeup on, or wash my hair, take a shower in the morning like we normally do. And those things are okay. If you are enjoying not having to get ready in the morning, if you're enjoying kind of not wearing makeup, or kind of staying in your PJs, like, that's okay if you're enjoying that. If you're finding, again, that you're really struggling with your mental health, and you're just feeling kind of blah all day, and you're having a hard time with that, maybe it is just as simple as get up, take a shower like you normally would, in your daily routine, and get yourself ready for the day. Just because you're not leaving the house, just because you may not be going anywhere, doesn't mean you're still not living your life and still having your day. So if that's something that's affecting you, then definitely take it on board, and kind of keep up with a routine. As we've been saying, sometimes routine can be helpful, even if it's just scheduling in your breakfast, right? So for you, not having anywhere to go is really affecting your mental health, as it likely will. Maybe, getting up, putting a little makeup on, getting ready for the day, whatever the day may hold for you, is maybe a way to signal to your brain, okay, I'm still I'm still productive, I'm still getting up, I'm still doing something, even though I'm not leaving the house. So it's just a way to it's another way to kind of trick your brain into getting into like day mode, rather than just kind of lazy mode or feeling unproductive. So this question comes up on the topic of dealing with guilt of working from home, whether that be not doing enough work or working too much, and feeling the expectation of needing to always be answering phone calls or answering messages, and worried about how your boss may be reacting to you, and feeling that sense of pressure of working from home. Great question. I think it's easy to fall into the trap of when we're working from home, we kind of aren't able to shut it off as well as we do when we go physically to work and then come home at the end of the day, right? That routine of going to work and coming home really sets us up to separate work from home life. And it kind of signals like, when I go to work, when I leave in the morning, I'm in work mode. When I come home, I'm in home mode. Now we're kind of being asked to mix work mode, home mode, mom mode, whatever other hats you might be wearing in the day. You're being forced to mix those things together and maybe wear a few hats at the same time, or shift very quickly between one hat to the other. And that can create a lot of mental exhaustion, I think, and a lot of pressure to keep up with things. And I think it's about doing the best that you can. Schedule in times of the day that you're going to be doing the work that you're going to be doing, and you set the boundaries on how quickly you're going to answer, how often you're going to be working. Maybe for you set a very strict kind of, I work from 8 to 5. That's my hours where I'll be answering emails, I'll be answering phone calls, I'll be doing my work. But after 5, I'm checking out and I'm going to turn it off like you would any other day. If you have a job that kind of requires a little bit more attention, even in off hours, it is really hard to kind of turn it off. Maybe it's not about turning it off for you because you have to be available, but maybe it's about reading the email. Is this important? Is this necessary to answer at 8 o'clock at night, or can it wait until the morning? So just checking in with the importance of the email. Is this something that can wait, or is it something that can't wait? If it can't wait, answer. If it can wait, put it aside until the morning. Again, I think that pressure that we feel is often probably more placed on us by us than it is by anyone around us. I think it's very easy to get into that pressure, and when, especially because we are working from home, I think sometimes for some reason we associate working from home as less productive or as not as good, which is an interesting perspective, but I think it's real. So I think being mindful of that and knowing that you are working just as hard even though you are working from home, and congratulating yourself for that and acknowledging how the effort that you're putting forth, and then being really kind of setting really limits on yourself in terms of when are you going to answer emails and when you're not, or when you're going to answer the phone and when you're not, and just kind of sticking to that and setting up a routine or a schedule for yourself on that. I guess on the topic that we just finished talking about the expectations from working from home, if you feel comfortable enough, I guess you could have the conversation with your boss in asking what the expectation is that they have, and do they expect you to be available all the time, or maybe communicating with them, hey, like, this has been a really weird transition time for me. I just wanted to let you know, like, these are my limits. I will be answering emails from 8 to 5. After 5 o'clock, I'm going to check out. I will have my phone on me if something is really important. Let me know. But otherwise, I'm going to just keep going with a regular schedule as I would if I was in the office. So maybe kind of communicating your boundaries and your limits on that with your boss would be, if you feel comfortable enough to do that, could be a good conversation to have, and maybe clarifying expectations that they may have of you as you work from home and as we transition into a virtual and more home-based work life. So maybe they can clarify their expectations that they have, and then you can also set your own boundaries in that conversation as well. So comment came in, I think again on that same topic about, yeah, deliberately turning your cell phone off, especially on the weekends, and limiting checking it to a couple times, and really being focused and intentional about how you're using your phone or your technology during this time. Again, it can be really easy when we don't have that physical distance from work to separate the two. So when you're able to turn off your phone, if you're able to, that's a great way to keep yourself accountable on not working too much, and even limiting notifications, maybe turning off your email notifications on the weekend if you still want your phone, or just muting those notifications, or moving that little icon into a different tab on your phone or different screen on your phone, so that you don't see it as constantly and you have to kind of go searching for it. There's tons of ways that we can limit our contact with things. Gratefully, cell phones and technology now are allowing us to do that. So you can kind of pick and choose what you want to see and what you don't want to see, and when you want to see it and when you don't want to see it. I think on the same topic too is when we do decide that we want to limit our phone time, and I think especially right now where we are able to access our phones all the time because we're at home, it's definitely hard to put our phones away because we are so easily able to access them all the time. So being intentional about putting your phone away for a couple hours a day, or just monitoring how much time I'm spending on certain apps. I know your phone tracks that for you on some phones. I know smartphones do. So sometimes it can be really eye-opening to go look at how much screen time you've been on, and seeing what apps you've been on the most and stuff. And it's really eye-opening to recognize, well, I've been spending a lot of time on this particular app. And when you notice that, then you can make a decision. Okay, well, maybe I'm going to decide not to go on that app tomorrow, or maybe I'm going to limit my time on that app to like an hour a day, or maybe I just do it in the morning just to check in, and then I put it away. Or maybe at lunchtime I allow myself to kind of open those apps and check through, but then I put it away for the rest of the day. So again, it's just kind of finding different ways to manage these things and whatever makes sense for you, but being really intentional, and kind of, you have to self-direct in that way. There's no one that's going to tell you to not be on your phone when we're sitting at home. You have to do that for yourself. So we talked a little bit earlier about helpful and unhelpful coping mechanisms during this time, and especially as we're going through a scary time, like we've been talking about the pandemic. It can bring out unhelpful coping mechanisms that we may have, whether this is due to boredom or it's because we're feeling anxious or fearful. Whatever the case may be, we can have unhelpful coping styles. For example, alcohol consumption or cannabis consumption could be really high right now, because, again, due to boredom, we're at home all the time. We don't really know what else we can do, or because we're trying to kind of numb out, and we're trying to avoid the feelings that we're feeling and the feelings that are being triggered by this pandemic situation. So when we're feeling fearful, it's a very normal coping style to be avoidant. So a lot of people, I think, can relate to the idea of, when I feel a certain way, if I'm getting too anxious, if I'm feeling fearful, or if I'm struggling, my way of coping with that is to distract myself, to avoid it. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to deal with it. And again, that's a very normal human reaction to overwhelming feelings, especially during a time like this where we have absolutely no control. That can bring out those kind of need to numb out or need to avoid even stronger. And a common way to do that is through alcohol or through substance abuse or substance use. And so if you're finding that you're reaching more for those kind of coping mechanisms, or you're maybe having more wine at night than you'd like, or whatever it is, it's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as it's not interfering with your life, right? And maybe if you're noticing, hey, I wake up in the morning and I just feel really sluggish and I'm not doing well, and you're noticing a shift in how you're feeling day to day, maybe check in and say, maybe I am drinking a little bit too much. Maybe I am coping in an unhelpful way by drinking or using cannabis or whatever substance you may be choosing. And as long as you can have that awareness of self, and awareness of how you're acting and how it's making you feel. And maybe being curious, like, what am I trying to avoid by drinking or by kind of smoking or consuming cannabis? Like, what is it that I'm struggling with right now that I'm not acknowledging? When we avoid, we don't allow or accept our own feelings. And this is, I think, a common thing for a lot of people. It's like, there are certain emotions in society that are acceptable. Like, we should always be positive and we should always be happy and show the highlight reel of our lives on Facebook or Instagram. And there's this sense of, we're not allowed to feel down or to feel bad or to feel scared or to feel anxious. Those are frowned upon. So we've kind of developed this way of avoiding that by, choosing to get rid of it in some way. But in reality, it's not really getting rid of the feeling. Whether you drink or whether you smoke cannabis or whatever coping mechanism you choose, it's not really getting rid of the feeling, because you're not actually processing the feeling. You're just covering it up with something. So it can be scary to decide, hey, I'm going to actually sit and feel what I need to feel. And maybe it's even just as simple as naming it and say, when you're, instead of having that second glass of wine, say, okay, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? And maybe it's, I feel really anxious today. My job is uncertain. My mortgage payment is coming up and I'm not sure how I'm going to pay. I have bills and I just got laid off. Like, maybe there's some things going on that I think, again, we can all relate to right now, that are causing this kind of sense of anxiety. And when you can pinpoint that, and then you can acknowledge that you feel that way, it's interesting. It almost feels like a weight off your chest when you acknowledge how you feel. It might not, when we think about doing that, it doesn't feel like it's going to be a weight off our shoulders. It feels like we're going to open Pandora's box and we're not going to be able to close it. But acknowledging your feelings is never going to hurt you. It's just about acknowledging your feelings and then finding an appropriate way to cope with it, or to process that emotion, or to feel through that emotion. If anyone is having like a hard time with that and struggling, by all means, right? I'm a therapist, and I really strongly believe in therapy and having another person to kind of bounce these things off of. So reach out to a therapist, reach out to a professional to help you through this time. This is, again, an unpredictable, uncertain, we've never been in this position before. So it's going to bring up a lot of anxiety, but there are people out there who are equipped to help you cope through that and help you deal with that. So by all means, reach out and talk about how you're feeling. Another question came in. So talking about negative thoughts, as I think we all are aware, when we're not busy and when we're sitting at home, and maybe we've all experienced this some time over the past week or so since this has been going on, but when we're not busy and when we're kind of being forced to slow down, that can bring up a lot of thoughts. It can make us be more aware of what we think during the day and how we feel. And again, the news can affect how we're thinking. Social media can affect how we're thinking. Even just, again, coping with the uncertainty of financial stuff, of your job, of everything, right? We're all of getting sick, potentially, of your loved ones getting sick. Like, there's just so much that we can be worrying about right now. And again, not to invalidate those feelings, because they're definitely real and they're real concerns, but we have to limit the amount of time that or energy we're giving to those things. At the end of the day, we're not in control of this situation. We're not able to affect the outcome, unfortunately. This is really about, we just have to isolate and let the virus run its course, and hopefully we do so in the least amount of cases possible, and we really limit the spread of it, and just kind of, we're taking it day by day and seeing what happens and hoping for the best. So unfortunately, we can't control what happens in the future. We don't know how this is going to work. So yes, being worried about how it's going to affect you is absolutely valid, and it's scary to think, like, I mean, if I don't work, if I don't make my money, I can't pay my bills. If I don't do XYZ, like, something bad could happen. And it's a very honest reality of what's going on. But again, if we kind of give all of our energy away to worrying about it, then we're not going to be able to find a solution, or we're not going to be able to think rationally to find a way to cope with that. So when we're, as I mentioned before, when we have negative thoughts and when we become more self-critical, or we start kind of thinking in that loop and that worry cycle, our threat system turns on in our body. We feel hypervigilant, we feel anxious, we feel overwhelmed, and our brain actually prevents us from being able to find solutions to that. So if we can activate our soothe system, if we can activate our ability to come down from that and to kind of just relax, we can enable our brain to find more solutions and to be able to cope and manage all of these feelings. It's not that they're not valid, and it's not that you're not allowed to have negative thoughts. You absolutely are. But it's about how you deal with them. And maybe it's for you, it's oftentimes writing things out is a really great way of getting rid of the worries, right? It takes it from in here and it puts it outside of us, and it gives us some distance from it. So maybe having like a worry journal, or we call it like a worry dump. So you kind of dump all your worries on a page and you can just set it aside. You can often rip it up. Ripping paper is a really satisfying thing to do. If you've never done it, you should try it. So that just finding different and creative ways to get your worries out, but not to kind of simmer on them and to stay stuck on them. It's okay to worry. It's a natural human emotion to worry, especially in these times. But it's about being mindful of how much energy you're giving to that. And am I just kind of stuck in the same thought, in the same loop, in the same worry cycle, or am I able to kind of think of ways to solve that problem for myself? And maybe that means not allowing myself to worry as much and kind of being aware of that and kind of redirecting your thoughts. Maybe it's about worry dumping and kind of having a worry journal. Maybe it's limiting your news intake. Whatever it is that's kind of creating those negative thoughts, there's ways to kind of deal with that. And we have to find those solutions for ourselves. And I hope that despite all the worry and the fear and the anxiety that's been happening within the last week, and that we can see in the foreseeable future, we are able to, just connect with each other as best as we can, support each other the best that we can, and take time to really check in with ourselves. This is an opportunity for some quiet, I guess, in a world that's usually really loud and really busy. And the world is still loud, as we can talk about the news all day long, but you have a choice to limit that. So just making choices for yourself and just helping yourself through this in the best way that you can. Definitely check out CMHA NB's Facebook page. They have a lot of different events that they're posting for webinars and different opportunities to learn more and have more Q&As. So check that out. It's a great resource. And definitely reach out to professionals if you're finding that you're really struggling with your mental health and with going through all of this. There's people out there that are able to help you cope through all of this. And I just really appreciate you guys all being here. And this was a wonderful experience for me as well.